listening to the Rainmaking podcast, hosted by high-stakes headhunter, author, and professional speaker, Scott Love.
Hey, this is Scott Love with the Rainmaking podcast. Thanks for joining me today. This episode is part of our legal-specific series. Especially if you're in a kind of law firm where you're selling to consumers, this show is definitely going to give value to you. Our topic title is Intake Efficiency, How Law Firms Can Convert More Leads into Clients. And our special guest is Bernie Clark. Bernie owns a company called Majux, that's M-A-J-U-X. And he spent a decade in marketing leadership positions for large and medium-sized law firms before he started his company. His insights are going to give you value, I promise you, and you can reach out to him directly by going to our show notes wherever you listen to this podcast. This podcast is sponsored by SharePoint Legal Insights, formerly known as Leopard Solutions, turning legal intelligence into opportunity. The show is also sponsored by the Rainmaking magazine. Don't lose business to the competition. Read this publication and keep business development top of mind. Visit therainmakingmagazine.com today to chart your course to greater rainmaking success. I hope you get some valuable ideas from my interview with Bernie Clark today. Thanks for listening. Hey, this is Scott Love with the Rainmaking podcast. Thanks for joining me. Our guest today is Bernie Clark. And today we're talking about intake efficiency, how law firms can convert more leads into clients. Bernie, thanks for joining me on the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so let's get some working definitions in place. When you talk about a lead, what exactly does that mean? And what have you seen the avenues that law firms get those leads? And then we'll talk about how we convert those into clients.
Yeah, sure. So a lead is pretty straightforward. Obviously, it would be anyone looking to, hire the firm for their services. Typically these days, more and more of them are coming in via text or, chat widget. There's a million of those, and we can get into that. But ideally a call, right? I mean, that's really what you're trying to get is someone on the phone. And then just what happens after this person looking to hire you or one of your attorneys gets on the phone, essentially, is kind of intake process.
Got it. So let's talk about your experience. Let's start with what firms get wrong in how they manage these leads. Let's kind of start with that. What are some of the major areas that you think law firms go wrong in terms of how to manage these leads?
There's a lot. I mean, so number one would be not thinking about this or considering kind of intake process. So many firms across the country just, pipe in calls from their different channels straight into a receptionist or a paralegal or a secretary that's just sitting there and never check up on it, never think about it. Many, you'd be very surprised, don't even ask where these, clients or potential clients came from, So, kind of starting at the beginning of it, I would say, is not even thinking about intake process, right? Then, beyond that, I would say not having somebody in charge who's kind of has some level of kind of specialized training, not putting someone at the firm in charge of intake, right? Relying on somebody that's doing a million other things, has never had any kind of training in terms of kind of how to qualify the calls. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients, that we have that start with us. Month one, we'll start kind of listening to calls or tracking down leads and asking clients, what happened to this one. People will call and some person that answers the phone will just say, oh, we don't do that, right? It's very often something that they completely do, and it is a priority. Or even, something that could be referred out, right? And just kind of managing that kind of relationship. And so many practice areas, with lifetime value of kind of client, if it's corporate work, if it's, you're an immigration firm or a family law firm, and then they might have other work. You kind of become their point of contact or whatever. Um, referring work out and getting referrals back is its own biz dev strategy, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
just not just dismissing folks that call you that are a little bit outside of your practice area or within your practice area and the person doesn't know it, is kind of crazy to me. Um,
Let
so
me ask
then,
you this. I
uh,
want to kind of go into this process a little bit deeper here. But one thing you mentioned, you said they don't ask where the leads came from. Why do you think that's important?
well, ideally, you would have somebody like us setting up the tracking and know where these leads are coming from, right? But, in the absence of that, if you're just kind of a solo, practice and, you have one paralegal wearing many hats as kind of doing intake, you know, secretarial work, things like that, kind of the face of the firm, you at a bare minimum, you should be asking how they heard about you, right? So, if it's a referral, the person gets credit. If it's a past client, you can send them a thank you or check in or something like that. If it's a past client, so many people call and they say, oh, I used you for something 10 years ago. I'm on my next divorce or something, they don't even know until they do kind of the conflicts check, right?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
And
so
so, so you mentioned having somebody in this role that you can train up, and I know you work a lot with personal injury firms. Who ideally is suited for this role, and what should the founder of the firm or the managing partner, what should he or she train this person to really be good at in managing these leads?
So ideally, if the firm can support it, you should have someone whose full-time job is intake and, client or matter opening, and then following up, once you send out a retainer agreement or the new client, docs or PDF or whatever, um, answering texts if they come in and things like that, manning the chat window, just leaving it up kind of on their screen, the whole day or whatever. Um, and putting someone in charge both silos or insulates them so that they're not distracted with a million other things. There's a filing you have to get out. They're busy on that. They don't answer the phone. They go out to lunch, whatever. The backup kind of call system kicks in. And it allows for specialized training, right? Because technology is constantly evolving. How people want to convert for different practice areas and different markets keeps changing and evolving. Um, and it holds them accountable, right? So, just walling somebody off to have that their full-time kind of job, um, is ideal, I would say. And then, if you have after hours answering services or whatever, staying on top of them, making sure they're doing a good job, that nothing's falling through the cracks, just an individual set of eyeballs on it,
Right.
I would say.
And you mentioned also a pitfall was them not qualifying those leads. What does that mean, and why is that important?
So that can go in two directions, and this might be, kind of obvious to some folks, maybe not obvious to others, but whatever your practice area is, you have a sweet spot of the type of client you're looking for, right? And every practice is different. Some practices cherry pick certain kinds of cases, refer everything else out. They have thresholds, they have to feed different, associates or practice groups or whatever, and kind of filter that down through. So, um, whatever kind of the type of matter that you're looking to get in would be kind of first, obviously. So you would say, did this accident occur in the last 2 years? Did you get a police report? Did, you know, you talk to the insurance adjuster? How did that go? If there was kind of a medical care plan, did you stay on top of it? Did you follow that? All those things. Um, just write a script essentially, right?
Yeah.
And kind of put those callers through that. Um, and then on the other side, I mean, the absence of that can create kind of a gluttony of time wasting where you have to do that, once the attorney gets on the phone, and that just eats up a ton of time, waste time essentially. Or on the other side, you can be kind of too strict. They might say, how long ago did this accident occur? If it was 6 months ago and they didn't, follow up with their medical care, they did the wrong kind of medical care, or they did something wrong procedurally on their own, that might be a case you can build up, right? But, the person, if they're not trained and not kind of in lockstep with the practice, might incorrectly kind of dismiss that person, say, "Oh,
Right.
we don't handle that," or "This isn't the type of case we would take on."
Yeah.
Um,
Those are all good ideas. Let me ask you then, is there any data that the firm founder or managing partner should look at in terms of their numbers, like ring and hold times, things like that, in terms of the actual inbound inquiries? What should they look for in terms of measuring data, and why would that be important?
all of that matters. So, there's kind of waterfall drop-offs that we evaluate for clients because we are the second pair of eyeballs in a lot of kind of,
And what does that mean, a waterfall drop off?
yeah, so I'll explain that. So, um, typically there's a raw number of people that come into any channel, right? Whether it's web, social, if you're doing radio, TV, you're using ideally different phone numbers or different landing pages for all of this. You can kind of measure the activity on the spend for that, right? And there's a drop off between just raw visitors, waterfall, to raw leads, waterfall, signed cases, right?
Yeah.
And having your finger on the pulse of both that percentage drop off, and there's industry standards, that you're kind of looking to be within, at least out of the gate. Um, and then beyond that, just the measurement allows you to get kind of a cost per raw lead by channel or even overall, just kind of knowing what your marketing or biz dev dollars are generating in terms of raw lead. And then the cost per signed case, ideally would be ultimately what you're trying to measure, right? So, that would have been my next. I was getting there, I guess. We're kind of jumping around, but you know, measuring, just getting it set up, the data points and the webhooks and the phone numbers that you're using by channel, just set up to track, is something that we do on day one for clients, right? So even if you don't yet have the capability or the capacity to have someone who's kind of inside the firm in charge of keeping an eye on all this, you know, hiring an agency like us, who can do this for you and kind of report in a retroactive sense. um, just setting up the data is day one stuff, just the tracking kind of knowing.
Yeah. And that probably helps with you making strategic decisions in terms of where you invest more resources to get clients by looking at what's actually worked out over time, right?
Oh, 100%. And it changes all the time, right? I mean, case in point, I'll just give you kind of some ballpark figures. Typically for paid social, let's say, and this is a conversation that I have fairly often, people will call us and they'll say, "Oh, I sat at a seminar and, we need to be on TikTok, let's say, or something, right?" You know, you can do paid social, but because of the kind of misalignment of intent, I would generally call it, and targeting, the ability to target for warm intent, you're typically spending anywhere in the neighborhood of, 2 to 5 times the amount per signed case than you would just kind of on, let's call it general, Google ads targeting, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, just knowing that, and then, even getting deeper, kind of if you can attach a quality score or, kind of overall have a kind of sense of, not all channels for leads are created equal. So, you might be getting really good action from a highly targeted kind of Google ads campaign. The quality of case is higher. You're not just looking at the raw kind of cost per lead, cost per signed case. And, from TikTok, it's typically not, it's more kind of name recognition stuff. And then you can kind of even take it one step further and say, okay, if we're treating, this particular channel more as kind of raw advertising or name recognition type of stuff, then we start evaluating it against other channels that are doing the same thing, whether it's billboards, sponsorships, whatever. And then you can kind of apples to apples compare it, more so than, if you're trying to compare, just using an example, TikTok to, your Google Ads campaign. Um,
And then
so
the inbound categories, it could be a phone call, it could be an email, it could be a text, it could be a form that somebody fills out, it could be a chatbot, right? The online chatbot that you have. Are there any other vehicles that we get those contacts from prospects?
yeah, I mean, new stuff's always coming out. There's ChatGPT keeps hinting that they're going to roll something out where you can kind of interact directly or have some sort of kind of mechanism to do that. I haven't seen it yet. I would foresee a future where that's piped right into your phone or your dashboard in some capacity. Particularly once they kind of advance the advertising, platform that the AI platforms are rolling out. Ideally they, similar to kind of how LSAs function or something like that, or text functions. A lot of firms are using WhatsApp in kind of Spanish speaking communities,
Right.
and you can pipe a lot of different channels directly into your WhatsApp. You know, it could change by the time this comes out, right? I mean, this thing, these are kind of always evolving. But I mean, those are the main ones. Obviously, you're trying to tip people into the method of conversion that works best for your firm, right? So let's go all the way back. If you're not having somebody who's in charge of this stuff and, you know, um, assigned to this, or that's part of their job function, you may not be getting back to people who fill out your form, same day, or you may not be calling them immediately, right? So
Right.
in that case, you're just not even built to support form conversions, right? So, typically if that's the case, we have to tip people into calling. If that's going to give you the best chance of signing that client as quickly as possible on the same call, preferably, um, that's what you have to tip it towards.
That's
So a
great.
little bit of it is kind of whatever the firm can support and does well for the firm. But then ideally you should be able to get and convert leads from any channel, the ones that exist, the ones that are coming out in the future, making sure all that's hooked up.
Now, I know what you mean, why you say it's so important to think about this, because when you're thinking about that and you're deliberate and intentional, you're going to see ways that you can get better odds of converting that. Let me ask you this. What is a process tree and why would that be helpful in this process?
Yeah, and that's the next step. I would say after kind of making sure that you have your data points hooked up so you can at least start measuring. Um, a process tree would be both kind of scripts and everything that happens in an organizational sense when someone calls, when someone fills out a form, when someone fills out a chat widget, right? So a good kind of easy to understand description of it might be something as simple as, when they call, splitting off the intake or the raw kind of call to say, press one if if you're a current client and calling about a matter, press two if you're calling about becoming a new client, right? And then you can point those calls, who answers those calls, everything differently, right? And then that allows you to siphon off your after hours answering, right? So if somebody's calling on an existing matter after hours, you might send them into kind of the general mailbox instead of kind of, clogging up your intake with somebody who needs to speak to somebody after hours. If you're using an after hours, call answering service or something like that.
Are there any software considerations that firm managing partners should be mindful of in this process?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons, right? I would say the first consideration is what case or file management system you're using and what that can support. You'd be very surprised or not surprised, I would say, to hear that every kind of case management system has its pros and cons. I would say I don't, and it's crazy that we're sitting here in 2026 and I would say no case management software has really gotten it all the way right. And firms bounce around between them. It's a major undertaking to switch your case management, software and
Yeah, right.
systems. Um, but some can't support text, some can't support automated emails that go out. Some can't support, you name it. If you wanted to kind of automate your, new client opening forms, send them out as a PDF and have it go, while you're on the call, you need to make sure that the lead data comes in, it pops up, you can take notes, whoever's doing the intake, and then just send them a text, that they opt into, and then they get the PDFs if that's how they want to convert. A lot of people, calling from different markets in the country. And it's also crazy, but I listen to so many calls where the person says, "Oh, I don't have an email address," or something like that, right? Or I don't do email, So just the kind of multifunctionality of it, whatever supports kind of your client base in the market that you're in to be able to convert into a client on that same call and be tracked, um, is what you should use. I would say, and then there's kind of all these bolt-on services, right, that are doing well. So CallRail is a big one. We're a CallRail partner. CallRail's great. It allows you to kind of create different phone numbers, create process trees, call routing, all that. You can track texts right within it, create different phone numbers that kind of all point to the same place for different channels. And measure it all in one place. It's super functional in its webhooks and kind of widgets of what case management softwares it can kind of layer on top and feed data into. Um, Intaker has been a great one.
What's it called again? Intaker?
Intaker, yeah, Intaker made a big push last year. They're kind of, you've probably seen this on different websites. They have kind of a little AI kind of based chat widget that pops up. It usually has some sort of video loop or something like that, or photo of one of the attorneys. And behind the scenes, it really is pretty customizable in terms of kind of the kind of questions or the intake screening kind of questions that it can ask, and then just allowing the visitor to convert, prompting them to convert however you want it to convert, right? So it pushes a call. Now they can do live connect, which is cool. Um, and then after hours, after hours answering services and kind of dedicated third party answering services are always ebbing and flowing. New ones are popping up. Um, you know, I would advocate that every firm should have some after hours answering mechanism. You know, uh, you don't, in a 24-hour world, if people are working all day and they don't get a chance to
That's
call
right.
an attorney, or they call on the weekend or whatever, you know, just because you're going home at 6 or 5 or whatever, doesn't mean that people aren't trying to hire you at 7, or 8, middle of the night. Um, so yeah, I mean, just making sure, that all of that is hooked up, that you test. That would be the next step from your kind of first question, is that,
Tell me about that. What does that mean, testing it?
yeah, so once you have the data hooked up and you kind of have it in a form where somebody's paying attention to it, and then you have kind of the process kind of all set up, it's also important to test because, you know, things break, people call out sick, the after hours answering service, that you signed up for maybe was supposed to be routing one phone number to Spanish speaking intake. And maybe that got hosed up somewhere along the line and you wouldn't know it unless you
Yeah.
tested, right? So, when we set things up for new clients, these systems and kind of the data hooks and things, obviously you test it when you set it up, right? But over time, you should essentially kind of secret shop yourself to a certain degree. Different times of the day, different, call prompts, press 1, press 2, whatever, and just test it. Make sure it's working the best it can. Ideally, you're recording these calls and you can kind of listen to the script if they're, still abiding by the script that you've given them or the guidance that you've given them. I mean, just even if that phone gets answered quickly, right? I mean, I can't tell you how many times we'll have a client start with us and then, we look at it after we have some data and we say, what's happening to calls between 12 and 2? And, oh, that's when Shirley takes her lunch every day. Well, what happens when Shirley's out? What's the call rollover process? There is none.
That's
Okay.
great, Bernie. I like how you bring that all together, finally closing with testing and improving it. And if we could summarize as we bring our conversation to a close, 3 action steps for people that have this type of situation in their model, what would be 3 action steps you'd recommend for them to get started making changes in this regard?
Yeah, I mean, I would say first, making sure that your data and measurement is set, right? That you're set up to at least have the data. You don't need somebody necessarily initially to kind of own, measuring the data, but at least have it set up where the data is there, right?
Yep, good.
Um, then I would say, second, ideally put someone in charge, even if it's a third party, an agency like ours, or somebody, internal. We train internal and work with internal staff members to kind of make sure all of this is going well.
Mhm,
Writing scripts, all that kind of thing, making sure people are doing it, putting someone in charge of it, I think would be the next takeaway.
mhm.
And then third, I would say just kind of what we were talking about at the end, just making sure that you're always testing and improving your intake process, right? I mean, you could be converting 90% of these qualified leads into clients, and it can always be 91%, right? And in the plaintiff's PI space, particularly, volume's great, but home runs are great too, right? If you are converting at 90% and you say, oh, that's good enough, right? Or that's great, way better than most firms, right? And that would be true. The 1% that you're missing could be a catastrophic, case that could, make your year, if you're missing that call. So, just testing and improving,
That's great.
constantly,
Thank you,
staying on
Bernie.
top of new integrations, new options, things that come along. Yeah.
And tell us about what your company does. What do you have? What do you do that you'd like our listeners to know about? Something that could help them, Bernie.
Yeah, sure. So, this process that we've been talking about, kind of intake generally and measurement and improvement, is something that we offer as part of kind of our service when we start, right? So what we do for firms is what I would call kind of organic and paid lead generation, right? So we're just an outsourced third party, an agency that can, handle building your website in a way that will convert better, writing content and creating a content strategy, that will convert better, um, setting up everything that we've talked about and measuring, and then just improving over time, right? Building the channels, whether it be organic, paid, whatever, um, and just putting that all together as kind of the one-stop shop. I mean, that's what most agencies do. Um,
That's great, Bernie. Well, thank you for being on the show. And for everybody listening, we're going to put all of Bernie's contact information on the show notes so you can connect with him directly. Thank you for sharing this wisdom with us today, Bernie.
yeah, yeah, and like I said, call me if you're having issues with intake, or you say, we're kind of talking in generalities, right? But, say, I don't even measure our intake or anything like that. We certainly can help. It's not something that we do only for clients. We can certainly kind of do this in a project-based sense, or at least get the data kind of set up for you. Call Magix. We can help.
That's great. Thank you, Bernie. Thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, likewise. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Rainmaking podcast. For more information about our recruiting services for international law firms, visit our website at attorneysearchgroup.com. To inquire about having Scott speak at your next convention, conference, sales meeting, or executive retreat, visit therainmakingpodcast.com.